Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. Everyone wants to say that they have a revenue operations team these days. It's trendy, right? Companies that didn't have the function in recent years are suddenly scrambling to get on board this wave and staff up with the hot new thing that is RevOps. So, where does that leave the market? What are the ripple effects on both hiring managers and the candidates for RevOps and SalesOps roles themselves? To answer these questions, I turn to someone who isn't new to this trendy movement, but rather someone who has worked in operations for more than a decade. My guest today is Krishnakumar. Anu is the Senior Vice President of Global Sales Operations, Enablement, and Development at SmartBear. SmartBear is a provider of software development tools built to streamline your DevOps processes. And over the course of his 9-year tenure at SmartBear, Anu has risen through the ranks from account executive to customer success to Biz Ops and beyond. In our conversation, we talk about the mistakes that he sees companies making as they're trying to hire for these ops positions. We break down the real ramp times of new operations hires on your team, and we even dip our toe in the water on a potential alternative to your staffing woes, hiring offshore. But let's start at the beginning. With operations roles in vogue, what's Anu seeing in the job market?
What you see in the market is companies that typically would not have hired an operations person is now sales ops or marketing ops or whatever. Feels the urge to have an operation, their first sales ops, first revenue ops person, which is great. It's good for all of us. It's good for the market. But I think there is not a lot of thought that has gone into the role, right? Like most of them is like, no. I've spoken to many sales leaders and other people who are hiring for these roles, and they're like, no, we are at a size where we need a sales ops, rev ops person. I'm like, oh, okay, what challenges are you guys trying to solve? And they're like, no, we just have so much work. I'm like, okay, all right. So, and I think that is an interesting dynamic, right? Obviously, there's a lot of money in the market. It seems like we're slightly cooling off now, but we'll see. But at least as of now, there's a lot of money in the market. People want to maximize the revenue, and if you look at lots of VCs and PE firms, they are pushing for these roles, right? They feel like that visibility is very important, which is great. I think, but then it comes with it, like there's not a whole lot of clarity around what people are looking for in these roles. And on the other end, for people like us who manage teams, we have, teams churning, because they're like, oh, wait a minute, when am I ever going to become a director or VP or whatever? That company is offering me that job right now, as opposed to a year or 2 years from now. And I think the challenge with that is they are also not factoring in that, what is the job going to be? Is that going to be any different? Or am I going to be in like just managing chaos every day, right? And I think on both sides, I think there's a lot of urgency, but I don't think there's a lot of thought that goes into this planning. I think that's an interesting dynamic.
For sure. And I want to make sure we come back to the candidate side of that a little later. To start, though, like you started to mention in some of the conversations you're having with people, if they are going to slow down a little bit and actually be more thoughtful rather than just like, it seems to be the in vogue thing to do is to hire ops people. Like, what is the guidance that you're giving people and what is the stuff that you do internally to be more thoughtful about, how do you get the most out of that next incremental hire inside of an operations team?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've been speaking to a few sales leaders outside who've been asking me for input on like, hey, we think we need a sales ops person. And this is what I tell them, right? Don't come to the conclusion because, your manager said so, whether it's the CEO, whoever, or the board. Think about what problems you're trying to solve, or especially if you're a smaller company, if revenue generation is a challenge, right? Is that where you want to invest your money in? And okay, you've made the decision, then the kind of talent you want to look for is not, I think many people are also confused. I'm sure you would understand and appreciate this. The distinction between sales ops and Salesforce admins and analysts, it's all kind of mixed and confused, right? Decide what kind of person you want. Are you looking for someone who would manage your sales force, that's an entirely different hire than a sales ops person who's going to be a strategic part of your organization, right? And if that's what you've determined you want, then the kind of the candidate they should look for is someone who has an entrepreneurial mindset, who's a problem solver at their core, right? Who's ready to jump in, identify challenges, talk to the stakeholders, and willing and ready to look at the world besides just the Excel sheet and Salesforce reports, right? Oh yeah, we are. I've seen it's very common for people to get caught up in, oh, this is what the number's telling me, so this is what I think we should do, right? As opposed to understanding what the business needs and what the solution should look like, and truly become a partner, right? That's the kind of person they should look for, and they typically are, again, like I said, problem solver at the core and have an entrepreneurial mindset. And on the other hand, for people like us who are managing a team and we want to expand, and you get that precious budget to go hire that additional head, right? And what kind of person you look for, and that is heavily dependent on the maturity of the organization itself. By organization, I mean the sales ops organization itself.
How are you either measuring or plotting where you might be on that maturity spectrum?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give this example, right? So let's say this organization has a VP of revenue ops, sales ops in place, right? And they're going to hire the first person, the first IC in the organization. And that person should be everything that I just described, right? They have to have an entrepreneurial mindset, problem solver. They're willing to talk to people, not just getting, hiding behind a monitor, right? And that would be the ideal first hire you have, right? And but then let's say you're at a maturity level where you have like 5 sales ops people already, right? Let's assume that all the title are analysts. You're trying to hire the 6th person. Now you need to evaluate what is this. It's not just about putting something in the job description that looks fancy and attractive to a candidate. What is this person actually going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, right? Is 60% of the job going to be account assignments and data cleanup and data hygiene, right? Then have that in mind. Don't go hire someone with 5 years of experience who is going to get bored 2 weeks into the job, right?
Yeah.
Or hey, we have a lot of talent that does really good Excel, Salesforce work, works with the managers. We need someone who can, bring a BI factor into this. Someone who can do Power BI, Tableau. Okay, now go hire that talent, right? And again, it is heavily, and you see this very often in organizations. They're all just so happy that they got the budget, and they're like, oh yeah, let's use the same job description that we used, 3 years ago,
copy,
right?
Paste and post it.
Exactly. Too much trouble. I agree. I hate doing it, but still. But I think just truly knowing what this person is going to be doing, and when we think about, hiring our next head, we think about, okay, what all the people here do, and where do we have the overflow work? Or work we think that the current resources are going to get bored of doing, right? And I'm sure we all can appreciate in sales ops, especially, there is this extremely crucial and terribly boring part of the job, that whereas a lot of the admin work and, managing and moving accounts and all that someone needs to do, but no one really wants to do it, right? And usually gets spread around in the team, but once your team matures and people are progressing, they want to come out of it. They want to start doing more strategic, interesting, important stuff. And your next hire needs to be factored in. Okay, some of the stuff is going to go there. So what kind of candidate we want to bring in?
So with everyone clamoring to add RevOps or SalesOps into their organization, Anu has identified a few common pitfalls that we should be on the lookout for. First, people aren't clearly defining the roles that they want. They're mashing together a whole bunch of different roles at once. Second, he's been able to put a spotlight on the traits that hiring managers should be looking for in these ops hires. He talked about having an entrepreneurial mindset, being a problem solver, and being the strategic partner to your internal stakeholders. And third, he's recognized that with each incremental hire you make, you have the opportunity to remove some of the less sexy, day-to-day mundane tasks from your existing team. This is going to be critical in a growing ops team, and so it begs the question, how should leaders think about the life cycle of operators within their teams? It all sounds good in theory, and of course, everyone wants to grow in their careers, but what does that path actually look like?
Thankfully, we have had a pretty good, stable team. We haven't had to bring too many new people, um, but it is a fun time, right? Like it takes. We talk about, our sales enablement team deals with, our new hires we have, and every part of the sales organization. Certainly, the AEs is something that we are constantly expanding and hiring. And we have all these ramp times, and ramp times are always just indicative, right? So you say 3 months, 4 months, it's depending upon person to person. But in a sales ops organization, revenue ops organization, it's especially complicated because it's not just someone learning how to do the job. They actually have to learn so much or absorb so much of the organizational knowledge, right? Some change that was made 3 years ago as an impact on something we do now, right? Or, do you remember that one time we had to make an exception and do this, this, and that? And that's why this is not normal, right? And all these things need to be imparted on someone, right? And I think over the years we've gotten very good at documentation, and typically the people that we bring in, they were usually interns, and then so they have some knowledge of it. But it's a massive challenge ramping them up. And what I have seen is the first 3 months, they really add no value at all, right? They're just hopefully if they have all the basic skill sets, you're just teaching them the organizational knowledge. But usually what they tell us is, 2 months into the organization, they feel like very comfortable and confident, and then they just hit a roadblock about something that's a total exception. And it takes about 6 months for them to really start contributing, right? That's when they really start adding value. And for someone to get actually good and they can kind of essentially you're fully hands off, it's about a year, right? And that's where I think we talk about all this hiring and churn and everything, and that's where the biggest challenge happens. You lose them at that 1 year mark. I don't think you've done yourself any favors, right? You could have probably gone without having that resource at all. You just wasted all your time in training someone. So I feel like, I think it matters in every single role, but in any operations role, it's all the more important you have better stickiness in the job.
The institutional knowledge stuff is no joke. We just did an exercise this week where we were doing an audit of a whole bunch of pretty old fields in our different systems, right? Don't get too excited. I know this is some sexy stuff.
Right.
we were going through this, and for most of the people on my team, they were looking, okay, this is things we can cut. This is stuff we can cut. This is stuff we can eliminate. And I have to be the one who has to have the institutional knowledge to say, this is the context of why we did this thing 3 years ago. This was the partnership that brought it about. And this is the reason why that data might still be helpful to us. But it's also, to your point, like whether it's through documentation or whether it's through other means of memorializing that information, we have to do a better job to make that ramp time faster. But regardless of how good you are at that documentation stuff, if you lose somebody after a year, if they've got that great documentation the whole time, it doesn't matter. You still lost them after a year. Right.
And someone has to read the documentation. Nobody wants to read the documentation ultimately, right? And I completely agree. And what you're saying, that feels is a perfect example. It's something that seems so simple and silly, and then someone who's new to the organization, even that person who spent a year in your organization would be like, "Oh, we don't need these 20 fields. Who uses that anymore?" And then you have to come, no, don't cut it.
Please.
Exactly. I think it can be understated.
These ramp times from Anu are a good reality check. 2 to 3 months where you're basically feeling your way through the dark, 6 months to kind of know what you're doing, and a full year to be a needle-moving contributing member of the team. So what then, if you're listening to this and you find yourself in the midst of this ramp period, or you're feeling as though you've hit a wall in your own growth? How should you assess either the opportunity you have or the opportunities that are being presented to you by a different company? Anu's take is not about titles or loyalty or even institutional knowledge lost or gained. It's about what he's been talking about all along, the core purpose of the role itself.
what I try to tell people now is do not take an opportunity just because it is a bigger title than what you have now, right? Or you're going to be working for someone with a bigger title, right? It matters in any role, some roles more than others, right? For example, if someone is going to be, let's say, we all work in sales teams. If you're a sales rep, you're going to be a sales rep for the next 10, 15 years. Let's say you've determined that. Does it really matter? You go to a company and you hang around for a year and a half, and then you go somewhere else and do the same, increasing your comp every single time. Probably doesn't hurt your career that much, right? But in a sales ops role, you do that, right? Any ops role, you're probably not going to go down and, no one's going to hire you for a leadership role, right? Or people are going to be very wary because, like I said, the ramp times are so high. No one wants to hire someone who would jump ship in a year or a year and a half, right? It's too much investment. So it's important when people consider those roles, and especially if they're happy where they are, or if they're not, if they don't feel the compulsion to not take jobs just for a minor comp bump or a title bump, right? It's better to first discuss with their manager, whoever they report to, like what is their career path. And hopefully the companies, especially in a market like this, they take this more seriously and discuss that more proactively.
Yeah.
But I think and also if you say, okay, great, hey, I've done the research, it's a significant comp bump, it's a good title, they have a plan, then the next thing to think about is, okay, do they know what this role is going to be, or do they expect you to figure it out?
I think you're starting to hit on, a concrete list of things that someone can actually take away from this to consider, right? Like recognizing you and I's own biases here. Like you've been at SmartBear for 9 years and I've been at Drift for 4.5, right? And so like we're probably a little biased on how we think about this. But I also think that what you're starting to provide is like this concrete list of, okay, if you are going to assess an opportunity, and I think assessing opportunities on a semi-regular basis is healthy, then how do you do that, right? And so you mentioned making sure the role is real and properly scoped. What else would you encourage people to look for?
I think who they're going to work for, but I don't mean so much as what title they're going to be reporting into, right? What is their experience? What can they hope to learn from them, right? And I think most people in sales ops role, especially if they've always been working for, let's say, someone like you and me, and they're going to go directly and work for a sales leader, it's very important to see what level of appetite the sales leader has with ops, right? Are they just hiring someone because their CEO asked them to, and they have no interest in analytics or ops? That would be a rough transition for someone who's always works for an ops leader, right? And that's important to consider. And I think the another thing that absolutely in this market goes under is the stability of the company itself, right? I know of people, I'm sure you know of people who move to this other company because they get this big title bump, and then they realize that there's like 7 other people in the company, and that's it, and you don't know when they're going to get the next funding, right? No amount of comp bump is material if you're not going to receive your next paycheck in 6 months, right? And I think, like you said, you and I are we have been in the same company for a long time, and that's not the norm. But what shouldn't be a norm is people jumping every year or year and a half, right? And that's just not good for anyone involved.
And I think even too, like if we don't look at it from a leader or a hiring manager's perspective, like the time and investment that you put into learning these systems, right? Like to your point about 6 months to get pretty good, a year to really be able to, stretch your legs in a new role and understand the systems, like that's real, right? And so your ability to then make a needle moving impact on the business, if that's your motivation for your role, you're going to need that amount of time, I think, to make that work. The only way that I've seen people accelerate that, and we've had great success with this at Drift, and I would strongly recommend it to both leaders and individuals who are thinking about this, is internal transitions. We've had folks that come from sales roles, from finance roles, who, to your point, understand the role that the ops team has carved out within the organization, and then thought about, does that match my own career growth goals? And you skip over all of the company learning, the institutional knowledge, or at least a good chunk of it, to be able to be a contributing member of the team much, much faster. So I think that's the only real shortcut to that year-long trajectory that I've seen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you and I have had, similar transitions, right? I didn't start in sales ops out of college, right? We all were in sales in some capacity and we moved into sales ops role. And you're absolutely right. That's a good, successful transition. But again, going back to just the transition, the time itself, right? And I believe you're hiring for a leadership role in your team, right? And if when I have to do it again, I would, we all look at the resumes, and the first thing you look at is like all the transitions they have had between roles or between companies, right? How often do you take someone seriously when someone has moved around like 4 times in the last 5 years of their career, right? And I think that's something that lots of people straight out of school don't realize how important that tends to be later in their career, right? And also, like you said, especially the transition time. And I would think if someone wants to be in sales ops, it's a really good there are really good career paths, right? And it's as long as you make the right move, you give it enough time, and be thoughtful in the move that you make. There's lots of opportunities these days.
Look, there's no perfect career path. And I meant what I said about bias. The career advice you hear from anyone is going to be given through the lens of their own experiences. But I think that if you take Anu's building blocks here, you assess the core of the role you're looking at, who it reports to, who you can learn from, and you compare those to the opportunities within your current role, that's a recipe for a decision that you'll be able to stand behind 6, 12, 18 months later. For me, I ask myself 3 questions about any role I've ever had. Am I learning? Am I being challenged? And am I building something? Now, those are my questions, and everyone needs to figure out their own. But if I can answer yes to all 3 of those, I'm fulfilled in my job. Okay, back to Anu. One of the reasons I wanted to chat with Anu is that in addition to these observations he's made about the market, he's also been exploring an alternative staffing solution. And he's been exploring it for precisely the reasons that we've been talking about: long ramp times, employee turnover, and most importantly, wanting to provide growth opportunities for the top performers already on his team today. And that alternative staffing solution is seeking staffing options offshore. To be clear, this isn't an alternative to having strong career paths for your team members. On the contrary, Anu says that maintaining those career paths is actually a catalyst for this offshore staffing solution. Now, this is the first guest we've had who's talked about going down this offshore path, so I wanted to learn as much as I could about Anu and SmartBear's approach here and how they landed on this option.
I think our thought process now is you're going to need, there's again a certain pool of money to go around, right? And you want to make sure that you maximize that on people who are absolutely impactful, the people who have the organizational knowledge, people, every other skill that we talked about, right? So you want to make sure that you have these strong candidates locally, wherever your primary location is. And then you want to think about as the team expands, at least the way we are thinking about it now is as the team expands, we want to put these additional resources in offshore locations, right? And I think the thought process came from, you see development organizations, it's very common, right? And I see in larger organizations where many organizations have this 30-70 split where 30% of their organization, the non-revenue generating resources sits in an expensive or the local location, and then there's 70% sits in an offshore, less expensive location. And the advantage that I see with a model like that is you get to keep your, strong strategic a part of your team happy, and I think the career paths are great, but if it's not accompanied by additional money, no one cares about title after a point, right? And it's not just something that you have in a PowerPoint slide. So if people want to have that career path, so now you start investing on these resources, and you obviously need someone, as you start to expand all this admin work and fun stuff that we talked about, and that goes to the offshore location, right? And another advantage beyond just, the cost, the challenge I have noticed is increasingly in the States, you could hire someone straight out of school, and you could, give all this organizational knowledge. They're doing all the admin work and all that. And 6 months into the job, they're like, they want more. They want more everything, right? And I'm sure you can remember this too. Like when I started, I was probably doing the same thing for like 2 years,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you don't even, there was no other option. And now people are getting bored and there are opportunities, so they could simply jump ship in like 8 months. So, and that's, or you are just, it's completely unaffordable. You're just giving, you start someone at like, I don't know, whatever number, and then you have 2x their salary in less than 2 years, right? And that's just not sustainable. But in offshore locations, that money could go much further, right? And you could keep them happy and retain that organizational knowledge without going crazy on your budget.
So I think I understand kind of like the catalyst for this
Mhm.
idea, right? And I
Mhm.
think people listening can put themselves in that same position, and they probably are seeing and feeling the same things within their own organizations. Once you have kind of that seed of an idea of, maybe there's an offshore solution to this particular problem, like
Mhm.
what next? Like what do you even do to start to assess the viability of that potential option?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and I think it's very important to note that the 30/70 model, right? The 30% has to be here, and you
Got
need to
it.
have strong managers, leaders, right? Just or even ICs in your core location. And it wouldn't work for a company, and I wouldn't definitely not recommend it. Oh, you're going to put your first sales ops person who's like in a different times 12 hours away from you? No, no, don't do that. That would be a disaster, right?
Mm.
But on the other hand, if you have a core team that is strong and you've identified good leaders, or at least people who would potentially be leaders who can mentor the people you're going to be hiring offshore, then that becomes a viable option. So now, as long as your team, the core team, is strong, now you again, no different than what I said before. You got to identify what kind of work we need done in an offshore location, right? Or what kind of work we need done, first of all, and how much of that can realistically go to an offshore location. There is obviously the challenges of time zones and sometimes language or the ability to communicate directly with stakeholders. All of that are involved. So, what portion of the job or the role can be shipped offshore? And do you have strong resources in your core location that can ramp them up, mentor them, and even support or manage them in the beginning? Over time, we would start to our expectation is we would start to develop a leadership team, even the offshore, right? So
Okay.
the mentorship and at least the day-to-day management doesn't have to be done out of the core location, right? Uh, Again, a lot of this is theoretical. We are exploring our options. We have to, maybe I'll come back in a couple of years and tell you how it worked or didn't work. But it so lots of companies have done this. Much larger organizations with tens and hundreds of operations people do this now, and they are able to execute it successfully. I don't see any reason smaller organizations cannot.
So leadership starts local, you ramp up offshore location, and then you eventually develop leadership in market. That fair
Correct.
in terms of
Yep.
like steps
Perfect.
here?
Yeah.
If we're, you and I are both in Boston,
Hmm.
and so let's consider, for the sake of argument, North America to be
Hmm.
local, right?
Okay.
And everywhere else to be offshore.
Right.
Uh, that's a big offshore,
Yeah.
right? Like, have you made it to the point yet where you have selected what offshore means for you, and how did you arrive at that decision?
Uh, Well, I think in my mind, when I'm thinking of offshore, at least for SmartBear, I'm thinking of places like India or Poland and maybe some other Southern European countries, right, where we already have office locations.
Got
Um,
it.
Obviously, different organizations have different appetite for going absolutely nuts with this, different countries, right? They don't, a company that is completely remote and is open to working anywhere might have more options. But also, when you're thinking, if you're thinking outside North America, you could be in Canada or UK. You're probably not. Oh, sorry, Canada is included in North America. If you're going to, I don't know, UK, for example, you're not really doing yourself any favor by,
Sure.
cutting down on the cost, right? So, and from what I see with other organizations too, usually Poland is coming up as like a really strong place for offshore hires for roles like this. India always has been obviously a more competitive market. And then now lots of Southern European countries are popping up too. There are good tax benefits there. So you see lots of good talent moving there. So that's a good place to hire. And I think the advantage most companies would see with Europe is the time difference. But again, it would be slightly more expensive than some of the locations in APAC or particularly more Asia. And I think for us at least, because we have offices in India and Poland, it becomes a more viable option.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't done a more detailed talent analysis to see what kind of talent we'll be able to find, but that's what we're primarily thinking of.
So if you're considering an offshore staffing path, Anu and his team have started by first identifying which roles and functions you want to consider. He also has this general guideline of a 30-70 split, with 30% in the local, more expensive location. Now, hearing this for the first time, 70% of the team being offshore sounds like a lot. So how does Anu and his team think about standing up a team offshore and making sure that they have the support that they need?
We had someone in our team move from our North American location to our location in Europe. Just more to, we're trying to put more resources in as many places where we have offices as possible. And in those cases, obviously it becomes much easier. Now you have someone in that zone, right, in that time zone, and you start to hire more people. Now it's easier for them to start to ramp up people in that location. But you're not going to have people ready to move to Poland or India, from North America that often. But if you don't, then the most important thing is like, okay, are there parts of the job? And we know this when you're planning, there's so much more work going into the data cleanup, identifying accounts and just grouping them and all that sort of fun stuff than the actual planning itself. And a lot of that could be managed offshore. And as long as someone has experience with the tools like Salesforce or Excel or whatever, that's a much easier place to ramp up on, right? So, and then over time, you can start to, as throughout the process, you can start to impart some of that other organizational knowledge.
So, if I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, and I'm trying to take the other side of this argument, I think one of the things that would give me pause about this strategy would be the amount of time and investment in the documentation, the process, the training that you would probably need upfront in order to pull this off.
Yeah.
How do you think about that particular challenge, particularly during the transition time?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it is definitely, it's obviously easier to hire someone, who sits right next to you, right? Or
Sure.
at least in the remote environment, so in the same time zone. But if hey, we are not going to be hiring, another person for the next, I don't know, whatever, call it 5 years, 7 years or whatever, right? Then probably it's not worth going to this model, right? On the other hand, if you know that, hey, there's going to be a lot of expansion, there's, you want to have a sustainable team, then the initial effort would be worth it, right? The first hire offshore is obviously going to be the hardest because that's where we are lots of trial and error are going. And like you said, the documentation and all of that. But once you have the first person, the second and third becomes exponentially easier, right? And again, this is all built around the belief, and obviously there has to be enough research to say, okay, we know we're going to need, I don't know, 4 more people over the next 2-3 years, right? And it's not realistic or sustainable to do that in the core location. Now you prepare yourself for this grind of getting that one person ramped up first. But yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's more about the trade-off of the short-term pain versus the long-term benefits that we're going to get.
Before we go, at the end of each show, we're going to ask each guest the same lightning round of questions. Ready? Here we go. Best book you've read in the last 6 months?
The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, of a, I think, highly functioning team. I'm probably butchering the name. I loved it. It's such a fun read. It's a short book. It's about, they take this fictional scenario and talk about all the things that could go wrong in a team and how you avoid it. And it's one of the most fun, not fully fictional books that I've read in recent memory.
Love it. Your favorite part about working in ops?
New problems every day.
Flip side, maybe it's the same answer. Least favorite part about working in ops?
Well, I guess you answered the question. Yes, new problems every day. I want to break sometimes, though.
Someone who impacted you getting to the job you have today?
Lots of people. So I don't want to leave anyone out, but pretty much every manager I've ever had.
Got it. And last one piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday.
Be patient, know what you really want, and think about what your next, not your next job, but the job after that should be.
Thanks so much to Anu for being our guest on this week's episode of Operations. If you liked what you heard, make sure you are subscribed to our show. A new episode comes out every other Friday. And if you learned something from Anu today or from any of our episodes, make sure you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Those reviews really help other folks to find our show. 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.